What is up, everyone? Phil here for KO Gaming, and welcome to the Hateful Truth video game review series, where I give you maximum truth and minimum bullshit regarding the latest video game releases. I am a huge fan of Ninja Turtles. Growing up as a kid of the 1980s and early 1990s, Ninja Turtles were everywhere. Whether it was the insanely popular cartoon television show, the original comic books, the rebooted comic books that kind of went along with the plotline of the television show, action figures, the early 1990s movie, Ninja Turtles were freaking huge. And also being a fan of video games, it was awesome to firsthand be able to play some of those cool arcade-style beat-em-ups, kind of culminating with Turtles in Time, one of the best side-scrolling beat-em-ups in history, at least in my opinion. But as the 90s got older, and I got a little older heading into my teens, I grew out of the Ninja Turtles and thought that I would never hear from them again. But boy was I wrong. Much like many things from my childhood, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have been called upon again and again due to the overwhelming lack of originality in people. Whether it was their live concert series, the early 2000s reboot, the crossover from the classic cartoon and the early 2000s reboot, the late 2000s reboot, and the recent Michael Bay abortion of a movie reboot, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles seem to just not ever go away. Well, you may not realize this, but the Ninja Turtles are also one of the most prolific video game series. In fact, just trying to type in the name of the subject of today's review into YouTube Gaming pops up with so many Ninja Turtles games, it's hard to even find the one that you want. The poor Turtles have been beaten to death when it comes to video games, and more often than not, unfortunately, the games end up being pretty much cheap cash-ins or stinkers, just trying to make a quick buck off of their name. The subject of today's review, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutants in Manhattan, is kind of 50-50 on that. What I think happened here was the meeting of two completely different groups of developers kind of coming together to make this mishmash, and I want to talk a little bit about it. Imagine the possibilities. If you had a group of people who absolutely were hardcore fans of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, understood the lore, the wide amount of characters that you could draw upon to make a really colorful and creative game featuring a lot of attention to detail and high production value. Hell, that sounds right, and that sounds like every possible thing you would want in a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, right? Well, for the most part, if that's what you're looking for, then Mutants in Manhattan actually hits upon all of those levels. In fact, they even enlist the great voice talents of well-known voice actors Nolan North and Stephen Blum, who basically have done voice acting for every possible AAA game in the past decade. So you can tell that who was making this game wanted to put a lot of time and effort into it. But then, there's the combat, and therein lies the rub. 4-player cooperative combat, beat-em-up style, sounds really cool at its core. And in fact, I think what they were going for with Mutants in Manhattan was a modern take on those classic Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade-style games from the early 1990s. However, it's all in the execution, and whoever was developing this game said, let's try to take all of those kind of tried and true Platinum Games beat-em-up style combat engine mechanics and put them into Mutants in Manhattan. And they did. You can do various combos by tapping a combination of light and heavy attacks and timing your button pushes. You have 4 abilities equipped at all times, which you can activate by holding down a trigger and then that button. Yes, the abilities have recharge time. You also have a dodge button that has multiple uses, including either parrying or spinning behind your opponent if timed correctly so that you can counterattack or just simply dodge. At its face, the gameplay of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutants in Manhattan sounds good, but what really happens in execution is another story altogether. For the most part, the thing that I can equate the vast majority of gameplay of Mutants in Manhattan to is a cartoon cat fight that looks something like this. That's right, because all 4 turtles are on the screen at the same time during the game. Every single time you get into a major fight, whether it's against little generic repetitive enemies or even big bosses, the game becomes insanely chaotic to the point where, because of camera angles, because of multiple animations going on at once, there's no way you can actively keep track of what's actually going on in any given fight. You will be interrupted during a combo no matter how much you try to stay linked and dodge every attack, because you're going to get hit by off-screen stuff, or there's going to be so much going on the screen at once, there's no way you're going to be able to tell when I need to hit that reversal button or when I can activate this certain move for a combination of attacks. And that's the problem with most of the gameplay of Mutants in Manhattan. You'll be running through semi-open world and in sometimes linear stages, fighting hordes of generic enemies. You'll be going from task to task, whether it's, oh, you need to defuse a bomb, or you need to hack a certain computer terminal, while hundreds of enemies will be coming at you from all directions. Obviously, if you're playing this cooperatively with other humans, it'll be a little bit easier, because you can split up your team and say, okay, 2 humans go off and fight over here, while 2 try to do the objectives. While if you're playing with AI, it could be a little bit more difficult, because the AI sometimes does not take on the enemies, but instead tries to do whatever the objective is with you, leading to you being interrupted frequently. However, the problem here is that it's wash, rinse, repeat. Oh, here's some enemies. Well, I'm going to mash some buttons. I can't meaningfully do anything against them because they're so chaotic during the combat. Next thing you know, all the enemies are dead. And then you go to the next set of enemies, you mash buttons again, and they're dead. Mash, dead. Mash, dead. That's the entirety of Mutants in Manhattan. Now, there are 1 or 2 things that are a little different. Later on, in one stage, you actually get a mech that has some abilities, but after about 5 seconds, you realize you could just mash the guns rather than mashing melee attacks, and it kills everything easily. And now you seem to see the problem with this game. It's just too repetitive. There's no originality here. It's literally just run around mashing buttons until you finally get to a boss fight. Now, I will be honest here. Fighting some of your favorite characters and some of these characters you haven't seen in a video game in some 20 years is pretty damned awesome. I mean, seeing Bebop and Rocksteady, Wingnut, Armagon, who I never thought I would ever see again in a Ninja Turtles game, was pretty freaking cool. And in all honesty, the boss fights aren't that bad, because now you're focusing all of your attention only on one enemy, and it doesn't become nearly as chaotic as when you're fighting these giant mobs. But at the same time, if this is really the only height of the game, these few boss fights that you get to fight, it's really underwhelming and it's really disappointing. The game itself only features 2 modes, single player and multiplayer. And guess what? They're completely identical. You'll be going through the same 9, that's right, only 9 stages, whether you're going with AI companions or you're going through with human-controlled people with co-op over the internet, because, by the way, Mutants in Manhattan does not feature couch co-op. You have to play with someone else who purchased the game over the internet in order to do cooperative multiplayer. But it's so limited in its content. Both the single player and multiplayer are identical. And quite honestly, once you play through the game once, there's no real reason to ever play it again. During the course of the game, yes, you'll be fighting generic enemies, and you'll be fighting bosses. You'll also be looking for these weird floating collectible orbs that are never really explained, that will give you items that you can actually use during combat. Quite honestly, besides the healing items, I really never used any of these because they're definitely not needed, since the whole game's just a mindless button masher. In addition, you'll also be getting upgrades. At the end of every single stage, you'll have accumulated some battle points, which now allow you to buy different abilities for the Ninja Turtles and equip them in an almost RPG-style setting after the course of every chapter. However, every Ninja Turtle can equip every ability. So what ends up happening is there's no uniqueness between the Ninja Turtles at all. No matter which turtle you pick, the gameplay is absolutely identical. You're going to mash buttons to do a combo, then you're going to activate an ability, and that's it. I've never played a Ninja Turtles game where every turtle was pretty much actually identical in their combat style, but they did it in Mutants in Manhattan. So the one thing they had a chance to do, maybe give the turtles unique upgrade trees and make them different, they completely failed on, because you can make them all have the same abilities. What the hell were they thinking? The graphics of this game are nothing to write home about. It's typical cel-shaded cartoony style. It's an interesting style that I believe is similar to the current IDW comic line of Ninja Turtles, so it's passable. The soundtrack is weird, and I actually wish that I could play some of the tracks for you in this review, although I couldn't really find many of them on the internet. They opted for this weird, almost club-style, throbbing bass music in most of the stages that does not befit the Ninja Turtles, and in a lot of cases ends up being more distracting than anything else. Makes you think like you should be in a club high on E, dancing around with stupid overpriced drinks and trying to get laid by cheap hookers instead of actually playing the fucking game. I just don't understand what the hell they were going for with the music selection.
Music, 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 oh. Music, 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 music. Play the music, do the music, shitty music, blah music.
The story, however, is actually the one surprisingly good thing. It's like I said at the beginning of this review. It actually feels like two completely different development teams made Mutants in Manhattan. One half designed the combat and all of the gameplay mechanics, and the other half did the voice acting and the story. The story is pretty cool. It seems like a reboot of the classic Ninja Turtles plotline where you've got Shredder and Krang teaming up to try to take over the world. You're distracted by all these mutants who are causing havoc in the city while they do their dirty work, and then at the end there's a big alien invasion. It actually was quite cool, and I really enjoyed the story and the production values that went behind the voice acting and the comedic humor and all the stuff that you would expect in a Ninja Turtle style plot. But it's a shame that they paired this actually good story with such a terribly executed gameplay in Mutants in Manhattan. But my biggest criticism for this game overwhelmingly has to be its length. I mean, you might say, you know, I'm being overcritical because maybe I'm a fan of Ninja Turtles and I'm disappointed that the game really doesn't do anything revolutionary. It's very repetitive and the gameplay mechanics are just button mashing. But the bottom line is games like this, if you play them with friends over the internet, may actually be enjoyable, right? I mean, think of some really popular cooperative games that if you play them solo probably suck, but if you play them with friends, it can make it a really fun social experience. But the reason that Mutants Manhattan is such a big fucking ripoff is the price tag. This game costs $50 United States denomination. 50, not 15, not 20, $50. The game only has 9 stages, only 9 boss fights, 1 per stage, with each stage taking roughly anywhere from 15 to maybe 30 minutes tops to complete. My run through of the entire of the game only took me about 4 to 4.5 hours. $50 for 4.5 hours of gameplay is completely unacceptable, especially in this day and age when we're getting huge AAA releases that are giving us upwards of 20 hours or more. Games that have both single-player campaigns and multiplayer components completely different from each other. This game being released for $50 is an insanely huge ripoff. What I will say is this: if you are a fan of Ninja Turtles, give it a rent, because you'll play through it in a few hours, you'll have fun, maybe you have a few friends who rented it too, and you might actually enjoy it. But to pay $50 for a game you're going to beat in 4 hours and really have no desire to ever go back and play because really there's nothing additional is a fucking travesty. To be completely fair, and before I give the game my review score, I will say this. Apparently there is a tiny bit of replayability because there are some secret boss fights in the games. When I was actually attempting the online cooperative mechanic of this game just for the sake of this review to tell you, yes, it does work, when I got to the Rocksteady boss fight, all of a sudden Bebop jumped out and it ended up being 2 bosses instead of 1. Now when I played the game solo, this didn't happen. Now what was the criteria for this to happen? Damned if I know, because the game doesn't explain. So it seems like there is potential to be secret bosses and different scenarios of having boss fights in the game, which might add to some replayability, but the game doesn't tell you how to do it. So good luck figuring it out without going online and trying to look it up, and it's fucking bullshit. Especially in a game in this day and age that's only 4.5 hours long. For you to have hidden content is unacceptable. I paid $50 for the game. Give me all of the fucking content up front so that I don't have to go looking on the internet for some secret criteria and massively replaying different fights to try to get the criteria to see everything you put into your game. Really stupid, terrible game development by Platinum. I don't know what they were thinking. So, some high production value, story, and voice acting elements, and a lot of attention to detail to the Ninja Turtles universe, paired with some of the most boring, button-mashing, mindless, repetitive combat that you've ever done in a cooperative beat-em-up, you can obviously see why Mutants in Manhattan is a mixed bag. But the thing that tips the scale to the negative for me is the incredible lack of content, only 9 stages, 4 to 4.5 hours of gameplay. Oh, and to add insult to injury, I actually forgot to mention that 3 of those 9 stages are actually recycled and reused. The sewers, the TCRI building, and the open city are both used twice throughout the course of the game. Unbelievable, especially again for a game that's $50. And you know, I would say, gee, wait a few months and this game will be a lot cheaper, and if you're a Ninja Turtles fan, check it out then. But the bottom line is, I have to review the game for what it is right now at launch. This game is not a $50 game, it's not a $40 game, it's not a $30 game. I would actually have a hard sell selling you this game for $20 with the little amount of content that it has and just how generic the combat actually is. Mutants in Manhattan is not a good game. Once again, Activision has done it, put out a stinker under the Ninja Turtles franchise license. I'm going to give this game a 4.5 out of 10 for the fact, sheerly on the fact that it's so repetitive, has little content, and is a huge ripoff to the consumer. Well, that's it for the review, everyone, and I sure hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider giving this video a like here on YouTube, and please check out the video description. First, you'll find a link to my raw gameplay playthrough of Mutants in Manhattan over on DSP Gaming, which is my raw gameplay and live streaming channel, where I've been doing daily videos for the past 6 years. In addition, you'll find a link to my Amazon Associates account, as well as my Patreon at patreon.com/DarksidePhil. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and I hope to see you next time on another review. Peace out.